Greetings and good day, and welcome to another exciting episode of One Path to Wealth. I am your host, Jeremy P. Dicker, the Hebrew Hammer, and with my co-host, Peter Hoopis. Pete, how you doing, man?
I'm great. How you doing today?
You know, I am doing really well. In fact, I thought it's interesting. We, over the number of podcasts we've done so far together, we've touched on a variety of things from parenting to wine to business to life to some market stuff. And I thought, today, as you and I were speaking earlier, it would be interesting to kind of talk a little bit about the economy. After all, we are in that business. We're now past the United States election. There's been lots of things that have occurred globally since that time and certainly leading up to it. But I thought we'd talk a little bit about it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a timely conversation to have right now with everything that's going on. It's been a couple weeks since the election. There's been a lot of news. I know you're having a lot of conversations day in and day out with clients and prospective clients, friends, family. We've got Thanksgiving coming up. So, I think this would be a great conversation for us to have right now. So, as you're out having these conversations, what's top of mind? What are people talking about? What are you hearing? What's on the Hammer's mind these days?
Yeah, for sure. So before I even get into that, let me make sure I put on my glasses, because these are not just for effect, as you know, Pete. I now can no longer see. So I made some
right
notes.
Here.
Yeah, I made some notes. So in addition to me looking incredibly intelligent wearing them, I thought I can actually see the screen. So in preparation for today, I thought of just writing a few things down that I think our audience would appreciate considering. So first of all, consider this. The U.S. equity market has always been bigger, larger than Europe's. In fact, recently, it's even widened more significantly over the last 10 years. So consider this little fact. Apple and NVIDIA are multi-trillion-dollar firms. At $63 trillion, the total market, that's the total market cap of the U.S., $63 trillion. That is now 4 times greater than all of Europe's market combined. And to put that in perspective, 10 years ago, just a short 10 years ago, it wasn't even twice that size. Today, Europe doesn't have one single public company valued at over $500 billion. The U.S. has 8 worth more than $1 trillion.
Wow.
There's always been, we know, always been a liquidity gap between the United States and Europe, but that gap has now gone from a gap to an ocean. It's a sea separating us both literally and figuratively. In fact, interestingly, analysts at the likes of Goldman, JP Morgan, Citigroup have singled out the euro as one of the most vulnerable currencies, particularly given the current administration here in the U.S. So, as we think about those facts, and I can take those glasses off because intelligence is earned, not visually seen through glasses, but I did need to use those to read my notes. But as we start thinking about what does all that mean? And so in some of the conversations we've had, obviously coming out of the election, certainly a contentious one here in the U.S., certainly the things that we're seeing overseas with Russia and Ukraine, the Middle East, locally here in the United States, what does all this stuff mean? So I think about when you and I began in 1995 and started in business and how the markets looked. There was no cryptocurrency. There were no NFTs. The internet was non-existent, and if it was just barely starting to scratch the surface on that. So why did we see this radical increase in valuations of both public and private business? Why did we see this radical increase in income, in an individual person's ability to spend? I would argue a lot of it has to do with information. I mean, today you have a computer plus on every desk. All of us are connected to our iPhones, our smart devices. We see information at the second. You don't have to wait at all. I remember getting on an airplane and flying to New York for meetings back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and you had to read a book because there was no internet on an airplane. And I think today the problem with a lot of this information being so readily available to the consumer is it allows them to make very unwise, emotional decisions rather than taking a minute and giving some consideration as to what those decisions actually mean. And I'm talking specifically to how you address your financial situation and the data points that I just identified. What does all that mean? One thing that I can tell you in my experience, and certainly yours, and then I'll turn it back over to you, is, no matter what's happened politically or economically, we always tend to figure it out. Things are going to be okay. The world, God willing, is not going to fall apart. We're going to ultimately continue to move forward. The United States continues to be the best home field advantage in the world, both economically and certainly from a safety perspective overall. And I think, it's very easy to listen to all of the noise and create fear that doesn't necessarily exist there. So I remember, March of the COVID year, as we saw the markets take that radical turn and recover extremely quickly. Almost faster than they declined, they recovered. And I think about that and I say to myself, well, what does that mean? What does all of this stuff mean? And what it ultimately comes down to in my mind, when you're talking about the US or Europe or the data points that I outlined a few minutes ago, is it just simply means that things are going to be okay. You're going to invest money in the markets. You're going to continue to put money away. Are we going to have a recession at some point? We sure are. Are things going to pull back at some point? Yes, they will. Will the political environment change again at some point in the future? Of course it will. Regulations will change. But at the end of the day, things are going to be okay. I mean, as I say those things to you, Pete, what are your thoughts? What are some things that you think about?
Yeah, what stood out as you were saying that is the amount of information that is readily available to us. Sure. Like immediately, right? And you mentioned it back when we started in this business, we didn't have that. If we fell asleep watching the baseball game, we'd have to check the paper in the morning to see who won the game, right?
That's right.
I would look in the newspaper to see mutual fund prices the next day, right? I mean, that's basically irrelevant, but we'd look that up. You'd get the all the stock quotes in the newspaper, right? Mm-hmm. And now, the second we can find anything we want with a quick Google search, right? And it's interesting because I just had a conversation with my kids, and they were saying, do you think our generation's smarter than your generation? And that's kind of the debate, right? Like, my parents were smarter, and we're not as smart as my parents. They're not as smart. I said, I don't know. I don't know whether you're smarter or not. What I do know is you are more informed than I was at their age. And they get the information from TikTok. They can get it off Google. They get it all social media. I mean, instantly, right away. And then what can happen with this is that we get fed the information that we look up, and the machines are smart and they know how to serve us the information that we're looking for. So what does all that mean? I don't know. It can get cloudy. We know that, but what does that mean going forward in terms of how we can react to certain things? And I think we had a similar discussion about this, maybe a few episodes ago, just talking about the media and what happens out there. But ultimately, I think it's up to us having relationships with people where you can digest this information and bounce it off of them. Get their opinion.
It's funny. Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I agree with you. And, as you're talking about the newspaper, I remember early in my career, having my office on the 7th floor of one of the first buildings that I worked in. And I'd walk in the office, and one of the guys that was down the hall from me, Paul, would always bring his newspaper in. And if he wasn't in his office, I'd immediately grab a copy of the sports paper and walk right to the bathroom because, you got to do your reading when you're on the toilet. And, today we bring our phones. I mean, how creepy is that? Every bathroom you go into, there's everybody that's in any stall has got their cell phone and they're reading the news from there. But I tell the funny story because it's true. When you think about, to your point of how much information is at our fingertips at any given point, and how quickly and easily it is for people to listen and digest that information and then come up with some probably irrational decisions around anything. And we're talking about the economy and the markets today, but it certainly does apply to our children. It applies to our clients, our relationships, our family, our friends, anybody that's got access to this information. And how do you digest it? To your point, you read the newspaper and you would digest that information, and maybe the next day you would execute on a trade or on a decision that made sense given the thoughtfulness that you put into that decision making. And today it's like, well, I got that info, time to go, time to act, time to react. But with all of that, I'm going to come back to my original point as I think about those words and we think about where we were 10 and 15 and 20 and even 30 years ago, things are okay. Like the world didn't fall apart, hasn't melted down. Certainly we have our challenges. Certainly I thought I saw everything, and then we had a pandemic.
Right.
But things are okay. And now here we are finishing up 2024, which is crazy for me to think about. And we're about to enter 2025. And there's news on both sides of the aisle that are, this is scary, that's scary, what's going to happen here, there, and everywhere. But ultimately, I think things are just going to be okay.
Yeah.
I know. What are your thoughts on that as we talk about it? Yeah,
most of the time they are, right? And a lot of that is don't sweat the small stuff, right? Things will work out. And I do believe that in most situations. Sometimes it certainly is hard to, have that belief or confidence or whatever you want, blind faith, whatever you might want to call it. And maybe it's just an optimistic mindset that I have, or you and I both have, of,
sure,
we're going to figure it out. It'll work out. We're going to, we'll make the best of it. But, I was thinking, with the information again, and I'm just trying to, I was thinking about that, the pace that it comes out, and you were talking about this, and the market will say, oh, well, that's been priced in, and now we just had this election and Trump won, and we're not getting political here, but the market, did spike, right? And he hasn't even taken office. So what does all that mean, right? Are they anticipating, or, they've already factored in earnings for the year, they've priced that in, and, is that more of a result of this information just coming now and people have access to it and they're already putting it out into the future?
Well, I think it's really about shiny things syndrome. It's like Bitcoin. What exactly is it, right? We know it's blockchain. We know it's a currency, but generally speaking, when I think about currency, that's just buying things with it. And certainly there are countries that do, like Venezuela is utilizing Bitcoin as their currency of their country, and people have certainly traded Bitcoin. But as a broad service or as a broad use, what's the utility? The utility is blockchain and what that means for the world going forward. But it's not. So does that mean it's a currency? I don't know. Certainly it's called that, and far smarter people than I have analyzed and understood that. But does that warrant the prices that it's trading at today, over $90 today? Does that warrant that? $90,000 today. Does that really warrant that? When we just talked about a moment ago, NVIDIA and Apple are multi-trillion-dollar businesses. Where would you rather have your money? The dollar continues to appreciate at a rate far superior to other currencies. Why is that? And I think the fundamental reason, when I really sit down and think about it, is because it's based on real stuff. It's based on the U.S. workforce, the U.S. ability to consume, distribute, export, import, and do all the things that are necessary for the United States economy to continue to hum along at the pace that it has been humming along. Versus when you think about what's happening overseas in Europe and the UK, the UK has got all these issues relative to the farmers' union in recent news. And, it's interesting to think because in the past, the U.S. followed the regulatory environment of the UK. The UK would suggest some regulation and the U.S. would tend to follow. Well, this is one of the few times that it's the opposite. The United States has always had an estate tax, or has for a number of years, I should say. And now the UK is following suit. They're putting that tax in, and the people are upset because of how that's going to ultimately impact the family farms. And I'm not here to argue whether estate taxes are right or wrong or whatever. I don't think they're right, but they're here. But it's interesting to kind of see what's happening and the philosophical things that are needing to be addressed in the economies like Germany, Greater Europe, obviously what's happening in China and Asia, and we're not even going to get into Russia, but what's happening also in the UK. All those things are in play. We're a global economy today. And again, as I think about this, it's like when people talk about, well, what should I do? What's different? Everything's different. Everything's different. You got not only information, but the ability to execute on things that are important or that you think are important. You can do is just at a moment's notice with very little information, or the information that you hope is correct. To your point of a minute ago, the data, you go online, you read something, and all of a sudden you're getting 17 different things on the topic that you just looked on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
That's wild.
I know. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
And for a guy like me who has limited, taste and can barely put together an outfit in the morning, it's great because I'll depend on these sources to help dress me and tell me what shirt I should buy and what shoes I should get and whatnot. But think about what that does to the information factory that come to us as mature individuals, to our children that are not as mature, and how does that information impact their decision-making process? Whether it be economically, politically, socially, whatever it might be, how does that information that they're receiving and the filtering, what does that do? And I know we're talking about the economy right now, and I think it's most impactful as we're having this discussion, but what does that information do?
Heavily sways their opinion, and I think that they get.
I would think. And, this idea that, the news sources today are linked to one side or the other is just unfortunate. I mean, I remember, to your point, when you wanted to watch a baseball game and you'd fall asleep, you missed it, or a football game and you had to read the paper. And now, you can go on. My son's been watching reruns of old World Series games, which is awesome. Never was available. So he knows the names of, and he's 9, Sandy Koufax, Don Drysdale, Satchel Paige. I mean, he knows these people's names, and he loves baseball, obviously, but those are the positives of all of this data information that's available to you. Yeah. But the negatives are, what does it do to someone's psyche? Are people able to really think through some of those things? Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned, Europe and Germany. I know you spent some time in Germany and Italy over the summer. I mean, just random question, but is anything pure different in the way people are getting their information, or are they like us, all glued to their phones constantly, heads down, staring at their cell phone?
I think it's as they choose. So I would tell you that in my experience in Germany, and I was there for a couple of weeks, and Germany definitely is more like the U.S. in terms of the information digestion, the work, the flow. Granted, I was in the big cities, but definitely it felt very similar to any major U.S. city. Being in Frankfurt and Munich, it felt like being in New York City or Chicago. Italy and France, even though we spent time in Paris, it doesn't have that same feel. I think there's more of a focus on, have a great meal, have a great glass of wine, enjoy your coffee, take your time. They're not in a huge rush to escort you out of that restaurant or out of that cafe. We're here in the U.S., we're so programmed to move. And that speaks to the statistic we spoke about earlier. Europe doesn't have one single public company valued at over $500 billion. Not one. The United States has 8 worth over $1 trillion. Why is that? And my point that I'm trying to draw, and I don't know if I'm doing a good job or not, is that there's got to be some meeting point, some equal ground, some place where we can all kind of meet in the middle. Does it all need to be about, moving faster and not being engaged? No, I think there needs to be a combination of the two. Mm. And I think Europe today is trying to figure that out. I think the U.S. today is kind of the U.S. that the U.S. is, although it's ever changing. Americans tend to be built to work. And I'm not suggesting Europeans aren't, but the lifestyle certainly suggests more of a focus on taking it all in, enjoying your life, enjoy that day, have your holiday, and so on. But it's interesting because the younger people today, as they continue to get introduced to all of these different tools, these social media tools, and just tools in general, are they going to have the same perspective that their kids have, or their parents have? Mm-hmm. I would submit probably not. I don't think my kids will work as hard as I do. I hope they do, and certainly we are doing everything in our power to ensure that. But do I think they're going to be wired the same way that you and I are? I don't necessarily think so. And is that wrong? I don't know. I think it's probably okay. You want them to be hard workers. You want them to have integrity, honesty. You want them to be diligent in everything that they do. But do they need to really go and put it all out there every single day of the week? I'm not so sure. And I'm not so sure it's healthy, to be honest. What about you?
Yeah, I don't know. I was thinking back, just again, going back in our journey together, running around, literally going to payphones if we had to make some calls.
Yep.
Face to face was obviously how we had to conduct business. There was nothing like this. So technology comes out, advances, which, in theory would make our job a little easier or more efficient, which it certainly has. And we're seeing even more of that with AI.
Oh yeah,
coming into the space right now. So what does that mean, right? And this could be what you were talking about, right? Do we fill our time with more work because I just freed up a little bit of time because there's some more efficiencies in there and now I can do more, which I think is pretty common, at least for a very driven person. Sure. It's like, oh my gosh, I just freed up all this time with this great new product. Now I can even do more and more and more, and I can accomplish so much by using this technology. Or does it allow us a little extra time to perhaps, spend with family and friends or vacation? I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know where that goes. I don't think there's the right or wrong answer. I mean, certain people, I just don't think or hope that people don't get stuck in that trap of feeling that they have to constantly try to produce more.
Well, I think that's a very interesting point, because I can tell you that, 20 years ago plus, we had no international clients. And today we do, because we're an internationally connected world. Like, we can do business everywhere. Our clients expect us to be available for them when they need to have a conversation, whether it be on vacation or because they've chosen to relocate themselves and their families due to work or otherwise. And I think, to your point, and we'll touch on AI for a minute, I think all of these instruments, if left to their own devices, are bad. Like everything, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. If they're left to their own devices without some degree of supervision, they're not necessarily positive. However, if the goal is to not go and spend hours and hours shopping for something that you can have done in a few moments' time, if the goal is to receive information in a method and a way that is best for you to interpret that information, if the goal is utilizing what you and I use today, the Cloud AI recording card, to keep notes of things that are important to us that we need to follow and make notes on, and if that allows for you to, number one, spend more time engaging with your clients and your friends and your family, if it allows you to free up time and not make as many mistakes, that's great. However, at the same time, if those AI devices change the way you think about a solution, if they help to modify a belief, then that becomes a problem. And I think, as we are seeing the data that we've spoken about a moment ago, and the different kind of growth metrics that we've seen, that we've seen around these different companies in different parts of the world, some of the ones that are slower to react, I suspect, are not utilizing all of those individual resources at the same time.
Yeah.
I don't know.
With Cloud, just going back to that, I'm using it in our planning meeting because we had that follow-up session this morning to fill everyone in. We had a full planning day a couple weeks back, all day, 8 a.m., 5 p.m. We covered a ton of stuff, and we were running our device to help with note-taking so we could be more focused and engaged in our conversations together and looking each other in the eyes. This was an in-person meeting that we had. Extremely productive day like we've had a lot of other times. And then what would happen is we'd have to go to our handwritten notes, or if we took notes on a computer, which again is taken away, we went to our dictated notes, summarized bullet points the whole meeting with action items, and then I took those action items, we delegated them out to the team. We had our follow-up meeting this morning. I thought it was extremely productive, right on track with everything. It captured more than everything. There's certain things that weren't even needed in the notes, but I think that was such a great example of the efficiency of just, I don't have mine sitting here, but just connecting that device to help us engage a one level deeper on a planning meeting.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's what it's about, isn't it? It's about efficiency, and it's about streamlining. And again, coming back to the same comments about the businesses, the ones that have succeeded, the ones that you and I know, the ones that continue to be the biggest businesses that are the most successful, are the ones that figured out how to streamline and build better. I mean, I know as we come close to our time for today, another story to share or one to think about, Blockbuster Video. You know, Blockbuster Video had the opportunity to buy and acquire Netflix. And at the time, what was Netflix doing? They were mailing their DVDs to their consumer. The consumer would return them or not. And that was Netflix. And Netflix was in a tremendous amount of trouble, and Blockbuster Video was the game. And today, Netflix is trading at $870 a share or some such number, and Blockbuster Video does not exist. And you sit there and you say to yourself, how is that possible? eToys. eToys was an online toy store, and they did everything right except they couldn't figure out one very important thing. How do you handle returns? How do you handle toys that get returned? What did Amazon do? They seized the moment, they figured it out, and they built a company that is what we know Amazon is today, which is not just an online retailer, but so many things, so much more. And Netflix, too. They're now a studio. You can buy movies, you can rent them, all of those things, all of the data that's available. They hosted the Mike Tyson-Jake Paul fight. Who would have ever thought in a million years Netflix would be hosting a fight? So I think, coming back to the comment I made at the very beginning, all of these things are change. All of these things speak to the difference that the world has and is experiencing, whether it be political or otherwise. But everything works itself out, and it's okay. Blockbuster Video went away, and Netflix picked up the slack, and we've never looked the wiser. eToys is gone. Toys R Us is gone largely, but Amazon has fulfilled that need, and so has others. Google Shop and so many other things. And that's going to be the way the world continues to evolve. It's going to continue to innovate. Consumers are going to continue to figure it out. The one thing that's clear is the consumer is always going to get what they want. Always. And that's critical because that's business. So, I think that as we wrap this up, I think as we're through the election of 2024, as we're entering yet another new year and a new time, and Thanksgiving is upon us, there's a lot for us to be thankful for. There's a lot for us to be excited about. Completely agree.
It's a great time to reflect. We're certainly in a period of change, and I think a lot of that is what you were talking about. It's inevitable. Change is going to happen. Without change, we don't stand a chance. So it's part of the process. We need to embrace it, reflect upon it. We're coming up to the end of the year. There'll be some changes in 2025, and that's just part of the deal. So how do we wrap our minds around that and prepare and be ready for it? And I think that's a key thought as we start to wrap this one up.
I agree with you. And as we close, I wrote on our weekly blog a week or two ago a bit about, without pain, how do you know pleasure? Without sorrow, how do you know joy or happiness? Without fear, to some extent, how do you know anger? There always has to be a point to every counterpoint, and vice versa. You don't get one without the other. Otherwise, it's just blah. It just is what it is. So I'm excited about the direction that things are going for our firm, for our clients, our friends, our families. As always, I'm excited about the direction that the world is ultimately going to go, because it's going to keep on spinning. We have no idea what's going to happen, but in all, I'm excited about being here. Things are going to be okay, and we're going to continue to move forward. Well, I'm your host of One Path to Wealth, Jeremy Dicker, the Hebrew Hammer, with my co-host, Peter Hoopis. If you liked this episode and others, please make sure you click on the like button, subscribe, and check us out online at onewealthmgmt.com. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to One Path to Wealth podcast. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.onewealthmgmt.com onewealthmgmt.com or give us a call at 855-663-9584. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of One Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. Investment advisory services offered through One Wealth Capital Management, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Insurance solutions offered through One Wealth Management, Financial and Insurance Services, Inc.